Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Hugh McKay, President of the Board of Directors of the City Club. Before we begin our program, I would first ask that we just take a moment to remember the victims of the attacks of September 11th, 2001. Thank you. My old man's a white old man, and my old mother's black. If ever I cursed my white old man, I take my curses back. If ever I cursed my black old mother and wish she were in hell, I'm sorry for that evil wish, and now I wish her well. My old man died in a fine big house. My ma died in a shack. I wonder where I'm going to die, being neither white nor black. This poem by Langston Hughes appears at the beginning of the award-winning and best-selling memoir written by today's speaker, Gregory H. Williams, president of the University of Cincinnati. While Dr. Williams has had a storied and acclaimed career, his Life on the Color Line, the true story of a white boy who discovered he was black, has made him a nationally prominent voice on the complexities of issues of race and the opportunities for understanding and strength through diversity. His acclaimed story is also a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome extreme adversity. Life on the Color Line has received myriad awards and was selected as Book of the Year by the Los Angeles Times. It's required reading for entering students at many U.S. colleges and universities. Dr. Williams' story has been featured on many national programs, including Oprah, Dateline, Larry King Live, Nightline, Fresh Air, and many other programs. President Williams also has written other books, as well as numerous articles and book reviews. Beyond his remarkable literary achievements in his day job, actually his day and night job, Dr. Williams serves as the 27th president of the University of Cincinnati, one of the top 25 research universities in the country. From 2001 through 2009, Dr. Williams served as president of City College of New York. He's worked in university leadership roles for over 30 years in a variety of posts at the George Washington University, the University of Iowa, and the Ohio State University, where he served as dean of the law school. Dr. Williams currently serves on numerous prominent boards in Cincinnati and nationally, and he has received numerous national awards. Dr. Williams has earned 5 degrees, including a JD and a PhD from George Washington University, and he has received many honorary degrees. If only he were not rooting for the Bengals this weekend. Please welcome to the City Club, Dr. Gregory H. Williams.
Thank you, Hugh. Thank you, Hugh, for that great introduction. It's really great to be here with you. Actually, when I'm introduced at the University of Cincinnati, most of the students just say, "He was on Oprah!" Exclamation point. Actually, now that Mrs. Winfrey has stepped down from her daily TV show, I fear that maybe my claim to fame is going to dwindle and diminish, so I'm glad at least Oprah is still in the minds of a lot of people, and I'm going to enjoy that small fame while it does last. And of course, talking about fame, it's truly an honor to be part of the City Club's hallowed tradition. I know you're getting ready to support almost 100 years of speakers, and that's really absolutely amazing. And you've given voice to countless people and figures in our history, and I'm appreciative of that, and I am truly humbled to be here. I'm also humbled to have so many of my good friends. I look around, I've got some of my fellow college presidents here. I've got folks that I've worked with for many years, former students, and in fact, friends that I've known in Cleveland over the years. And in fact, one young lady I drug off the street just as she was walking by to come in and come to the lunch. This is a moment, actually, that I never imagined was possible as a biracial adolescent growing up in Muncie, Indiana in the 1950s. Sometimes, actually, when I'm introduced, there's a flutter of confusion in the audience. Some eyebrows raise or curl up and say, "Well, where's the black guy?" He does not look black. How can he be black when he doesn't look black? And I would imagine maybe, if truth be told, that question might be on the minds of some of you people sitting in the audience right now. Actually, even during our University of Cincinnati commencement this spring, some members of the audience and possibly some of the graduates weren't listening to the speeches. They were on Twitter commenting about the president. And one said, "Whoever said the president of the University of Cincinnati is black is sadly mistaken." More bluntly, one said, "He's as white as day, LOL." So in some actually ways, this confusion might show how far we have come from the moment over 5 decades ago when my life turned upside down, literally overnight. The moment when I, as a 10-year-old boy, learned that my father actually had been living a charade. He had told people that he was Greek or Italian, but not that he was African American. And that moment marked an undeniable shift in my life, literally, from one day to the next. So rigid were the color lines in 1954 that it's hard for young people today to comprehend that back then it didn't matter how light my skin might be or how small the fraction of my African ancestry might be. The rules were strictly enforced and embedded not only in our culture, but in our laws. And laws throughout the United States, the laws and the codes was the one-drop rule. If you were any part black, you were considered black. And you did not have the same opportunities and privileges as a white person. And so it's no wonder that my dad did in fact try to hide the fact that he was black. In Virginia, where my parents made their home in my early life, anti-miscegenation laws rendered interracial marriage a criminal act, and it was prosecuted. And it was not until 1967, in the Supreme Court case of Loving versus Virginia, that the laws of Virginia and 16 other states were finally struck down, and my parents could not have been arrested. Actually, ironically, in talking about the discovery of my life, it was in the middle of the state of Ohio. I was on a Greyhound bus somewhere between Dayton and Columbus on old US 40. My father told me the truth that changed my life forever. We had boarded a bus in Washington, D.C., and my father, an often violent alcoholic, had lost everything that he had worked for. My mother had fled his beatings, taking my younger brother and sister with her and leaving me and my brother Mike behind. As a man who drank too much, actually my dad had the worst kind of business in the world. He owned a tavern. He lost that, plus our cars, our home near the tavern, as the townhouse in Alexandria. All our worldly possessions were lost. And then when he lost everything, and we had nothing, Dad, Mike, and me boarded a bus from Washington, D.C., for Muncie, Indiana, with all our worldly possessions, the three of us, everything we had crammed in one canvas bag. Now, actually, my brother and I were elated that we were going to Indiana because we thought that our recent poverty after my mother left was going to be replaced by the comfort and love of our mother's parents, our grandparents. And my brother and I assumed that we were off to visit my mother's parents, with whom we had spent a lot of fun-filled days, Christmases, summer holidays. There was always plenty to eat. I remember picking strawberries off the vines in the garden. I remember the mashed potatoes piled on the plates and platters of fried chicken. And so being hungry boys, and as some of you may come from families of alcoholics, and you know that alcoholics are not interested in eating. They're interested in drinking. And if you're in that family, 2 boys, you're not eating. And so we were looking forward to going and living with our mother's parents. And we'd visited them in Muncie many times. Now, we didn't think of them as white, but they were white. But on that bus, after a long night setting up, my dad leaned across the aisle to me and said, "Greg, do you remember Miss Sally?" And I did remember her. She was a tall, thin black woman who had worked for us in the tavern, who'd kind of floated in and out of our lives. Actually, I didn't really like her that much because she was pretty unfriendly. I said, "Yeah, Dad, I remember her." And then that morning, he leaned across the aisle, lest to be overheard by the white passengers on the bus, and said, "Well, I've got something to tell you. She's my mama, and she's your grandmother." I was in a state of shock, because even at the age of 10, I knew how the life how the rewards and benefits of America were structured, that life is better if you are white. And my father warned us that morning in the vernacular of that time in 1954. He said, life is going to be different from now on. In Virginia, you were white boys. In Indiana, you're going to be colored boys. You're not any different, but people are going to treat you different once you get off this bus. And you're just going to have to learn how to live with that. I had hoped that my dad was wrong about that, but his words proved to be truer than any of us could have ever imagined. So once I arrived in Muncie, we were rarely invited to our white grandparents' home, and they never entered a home in which I lived in Muncie. And in fact, my white grandmother, my black grandmother, both lived into their 80s, less than 2 miles from each other. And they never, ever spoke to one another. That was also the beginning. My brother and I would neither see nor hear from our mother, brother, or sister for 10 years. Not one card, letter, or telephone. We were on our own. Instead, we moved in with our black grandmother into a tar paper shack. When we got off that bus, we walked down the railroad tracks to 601.5 Railroad Street in Muncie, Indiana. And as the name implies, it was right next to the railroad. In fact, 25 steps from where I slept on an army cot in a little 3-room shack with me at one end and my brother at the other end. To make matters worse, my grandmother, Miss Sally, like my dad, turned out to be an alcoholic as well. At school, teachers were relentless in making sure that all the racial classification lines were adhered to. And in fact, the day my dad took us to school, I remember he wrote W in the box for race to continue to still try to pass for white. And later on, I discovered that actually school officials had come behind him and crossed that out with an X and put C for colored above that on my school record. And lest anyone be misunderstand that, appended a note that Greg is black even though he looks white. There's a brother and there's a woman they claim is no relation to them who's black. So you can see I've been a dilemma for people for a long time. The comfortable and well-to-do life we had known as a white family in Virginia was forever erased. In its place stood hunger, poverty, neglect, and rejection from both whites and blacks. Eventually, our black family and friends accepted us, and I came to view myself as African American. But there were a lot of fights on the playgrounds and cuts and bruises before we reached that point. Well, let's fast forward to the 1990s. Surely things were different by then. Shortly after my book was published, my wife Sarah and I adopted 2 twin boys from Honduras, 2 orphans. Tony and Carlos came to live with us, and they had only been with us for 6 months. And I remember the day that Tony came walking in the door and said, "Dad, I want to be white." He had only been in America, even at the age of 7, living in the United States, 127 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, 38 years after my father's confession to me, 28 years after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, my Honduran son, Tony, knew that life was better if you were white. How did he come to learn that in just 6 months in this country? A few years later, when my memoir came out, another biracial author published a book of his own about the same time. The book, Dreams of My Father, A Story of Race and Inheritance, languished in relative obscurity until that author ran for the United States Senate. And then in 2008, the American people elected the author Barack Obama, the first African-American president of the United States of America. It was a very historic moment, and I will never forget the euphoria of election night and, of course, the inauguration that followed 2 months later. I remember the energetic sense of optimism and joy that we saw on each other's faces as we watched and as we celebrated. What stands out for me was that the exuberance and the sense of history crossed the color line. Imagine the possibilities in our nation if we could experience that sense of hope and unity every day. Pundits, of course, have even suggested with the election of our first African-American president, our nation has entered a post-racial era. Some also suggested that the election of Barack Obama was the ultimate realization of the dream that the great American leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., spoke about so eloquently in 1963. Just 12 days ago, our nation was prepared to dedicate a permanent memorial to Dr. King in Washington, D.C., between the Lincoln and the Jefferson memorials. It was to be dedicated on the 48th anniversary of the March on Washington and the I Have a Dream speech, both of which I watched on television. I was planning to go in person this time until Hurricane Irene had other plans. But no matter when that dedication will actually happen, the memorial stands as a tribute to the great strides that we have made in the civil rights cause. But it also stands as a permanent sentinel that Dr. King's dream still requires enduring vigilance. I do not see the election of our first African-American president or the dedication of the Martin Luther King Memorial as an end to the dream, but rather an installment in it. The dream still lives, and in my view, it's up to each one of us to keep it alive and to make it real. Yes, it is true that our nation has made great progress in inclusion and diversity, and it's true that the Jim Crow era that I grew up in and my father was in and came of age in is over. Since that first March on Washington in 1963, we have witnessed extraordinary achievements on the civil rights front, with civil rights growing to encompass women's rights, disability rights, human rights, gay and lesbian rights. And certainly, there is less rigidity in America's color line today than there was in the 1960s. Many, particularly the younger generation, may not even see a color line, or they cross it easily. We live in a time, thankfully, where the multiracial population is growing and barely raises an eyebrow these days. Yet all of us can be yanked back across that line by a look, a so-called joke, or a tense reception in the so-called a wrong neighborhood. I've been approached all over the country. Since the book's come out, I've traveled across the country talking about the issues of race and racism. And even to this day, I have interracial couples walk up to me during my book signings or after the speeches I give and tell me that parents or friends or relatives will not speak to them because of their decision to be together to cross racial lines till today. One of my own neighbors, actually, when I was selected as dean of the law school at the Ohio State University, congratulated me on my appointment. She said, "That's great. You must be really smart, fantastic, and I'm so delighted to have you here as our dean of the law school." Later, I learned when she discovered my mixed race background, she asked, well, did he get the job because he was black? So when she assumed I was white, she assumed I was qualified. When she found out that I was biracial, she assumed I was unqualified for the job. So however numerous strides we have made in the way race is lived in our nation, we know that we have plenty of progress yet to make. Dr. King's dream remains elusive in many parts of our society, including our criminal justice system, education, and economic opportunity. Only 6 years ago, another hurricane, Katrina, presented us all with a chilling reminder that the color of your skin does in fact matter. It mattered very much in a life and death way. Beyond the harrowing images of the people stranded at the Superdome being predominantly black, a Washington Post reporter and a Stanford professor of communication teamed up on a study of race and Katrina. They set out to test whether skin color would influence people's perceptions of how much aid an individual should assume or should receive in the wake of the disaster. And using photos of various skin colors, they discovered that whites were deemed to be more deserving of greater financial assistance than blacks, Hispanics, and Asians. Several weeks ago on this same platform, Harvard Law School Dean Martha Minow spoke candidly about the segregation that still exists in our nation's schools. In a recent book examining the legacy of Brown versus the Board of Education, she notes that in large urban districts, 70% of students are non-white, over half are poor or near poor, and each faces higher level of violence, disruption, and dropping out, and lower test scores in comparison to suburban schools. There is a difference. Let me share a few more examples where the dream that Dr. King talked about falls short. Examples that I gathered with the help of some very knowledgeable University of Cincinnati faculty members in criminal justice and management, as well as some of my friends in the financial industry. The dream of freedom and justice. For a black male in our nation, the lifetime likelihood of spending time in a state or federal prison is 1 in 3, compared to 1 in 17 for white men. And that does not include local jails like the Cuyahoga County Corrections here in downtown Cincinnati, or the Hamilton County Justice Center in Cincinnati, and Cuyahoga County, of course, here in Cleveland. The dream of higher education. I already mentioned lingering issues in primary and secondary schools. Well, what about post-secondary education? Without a doubt, our colleges across the nation are much more diverse than they once were. Yet our nation's black-white college graduation rates remain separated by a significant gap of 19 percentage points. The Latino college graduation rate lags the white rate by 9 points. Another recurring shortfall is that the proportion of Latino and Asian American and African American faculty teaching in our universities continues to lag behind the enrollment of those population of students, leaving few role models for students. The dream of corporate inclusion. My father, despite his drinking problems, had tremendous optimism and often told me, he said, "Greg, I want you in that room." And I didn't understand what he was saying to me when he said those things, actually, because when he said it, he was holding a broom standing outside City Hall council chambers when I was a kid growing up and I was helping him there. But ultimately I discovered that what he meant, and he would be tremendously pleased to know that actually I am on a number of corporate and community boards. But white men still dominate the corporate boardroom with less than 10% of the Fortune 500 companies' board seats given to people of color. White men hold close to 95% of the chairs of those corporate boards. The dream of economic opportunity. When it comes to dollars and cents, the reality remains bleak. It is well known that with the economic downturn that our nation has been experiencing, the unemployment rate for African Americans and Latinos far exceeds that of whites. While there's evidence the income gap is drawing closer, blacks still earn 62 cents and Latinos 68 cents for every dollar of white income. On measures of wealth in our nation, which includes assets such as homes, savings, and investments, we find a truly harsh reality. A Pew study shows that the white-black wealth gap now stands at the widest point it's ever been since they started collecting data in 1984. White wealth outpaces black wealth by 20 to 1. To be exact, the median wealth of African Americans and Hispanics hovers in the range of $60,000. Compared to $113,000 for whites. That's a gap. Also telling is the fact that about 1/3 of black and Hispanic households had zero or negative worth in comparison to 15% of white households. The dream to be able to live. According to the Centers for Disease Control, the leading cause of death for black males aged 15 to 34, and many of you know it, is homicide. For black men of any age, it's the number 4 cause of death, especially in large urban areas where young black men are murdered on a daily basis, and it seems like our communities are almost blind to it. These are tragedies that not only take away those individuals' lives, but think of the impact it has on the families, the mothers, the fathers, the sisters, the brothers, the aunts and uncles, and the community. So as you can see, while our nation has removed the legal impediments to the dream, and strides have been achieved, there's a lot of obstacles that still remain. But we must keep the dream alive. We must keep it alive by owning it ourselves and making it part of our personal lives. We must remain vigilant, and we must keep talking and examining the truth. We must keep exploring the ideal of respecting differences and recognizing that each person, no matter their race or social background or gender or orientation, is unique and has special gifts to offer to our society. And while each of us is different and offers unique talents, we also know that deep down we have a lot of things in common. Earlier this year, actually, on National Public Radio, there was a report about this popular cable network, Home and Garden Television, HGTV. I'm not going to ask how many watch it. But HGTV actually realized in recent years that inclusion made sense because it increases their audience and their viewership ratings. As a result of a 5-year effort to pay more attention to diversity, they make sure their programs reflect a more varied portrait of our society. Their audience was up by 20%, and their African-American audience was up by 50%. What is somewhat ironic here is that in the process of celebrating diversity, HGTV also uncovered there's a common thread that binds us all, no matter our race or background. According to the NPR report, all of us want stainless steel appliances. Now, it may be simpler if the dream were just about stainless steel appliances, right? But obviously it's much bigger than that. In the end, our progress on the dream hinges on our ability to create bridges of understanding to help people discover that racial harmony and equality require a personal commitment. And we won't get anywhere unless each of us makes a decision on an individual level. In my own life, I would not have been able to overcome the pain, the prejudice, the hunger, and the challenges that I faced as a biracial boy growing up in the black housing projects of Muncie, Indiana, if it had not been for the care and personal commitment to me that some people made, most especially one person. A 55-year-old black woman with an 8th grade education from Grady, Arkansas, named Dora Weekly Terry. She worked as a domestic for a white family for $25 a week, 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. And I relished those evenings when she would stop by 601.5 Railroad Street on the way home from the white family for whom she worked and share what she had in her shopping bag with her, leftovers. It was a special time that showed me that someone still cared about me and my brother and what was happening to us. Now, Miss Dora was a religious person. She attended church regularly, and she knew the difference between right and wrong. And she never asked, what can one person do? A woman with an 8th grade education, making $25 a week. One day as she walked by, Miss Dora saw my brother and me sitting dirty and hungry on a plank bench in the dirt-covered yard right outside of 601.5 Railroad Street, sitting there with our grandmother and our dad both passed out drunk on the dirt yard, and my brother and I sitting there waiting for them to get up. And although she owned a little herself, she decided that she was going to take me and my brother home with us, with her, and make us her boys. And she did this over the objections of her own church members and said, why are you doing this? They have white relatives, black relatives who could be taking care of you. You're a widow woman making no money. Why are you taking in these 2 little white boys? But she said we were her boys, and she was going to take us in. And that made all the difference. By her example, Miss Dora taught me that one person can make a difference, can make a huge difference. And frankly, I would not be standing here today if she hadn't reached down and picked me and my brother up out of that alley at 601.5 Railroad Street. She did not know I was going to be the 27th president of the University of Cincinnati, but she thought that I might have some promise. She taught me that without individual action, change does not happen. All our nation's greatest achievements have been brought about by individuals willing to take action. Women and men like the conductors on the Underground Railroad during our nation's despicable days of slavery. On the banks of the Ohio River, where, of course, I live today, Cincinnati is home to the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, a museum that pays tribute to freedom-loving heroes that would not accept slavery as the status quo. The Freedom Center also honors those who continue to fight slavery around the world today. Enslavement in the form of forced labor, human trafficking, child soldiers, and other forms of coercion. The same kind of individual commitment that led conductors to help runaway slaves has inspired freedom riders, marchers, strikers, and all those people in the end were really regular people like me and you. And if we ever truly want to see a post-racial time in our nation, then each of us, on an individual level, must recognize that all Americans, no matter our race or ethnic background, have the right to achieve the American dream for ourselves and for our children. At the same time, it's important to embrace this commitment at the organizational and the institutional level as well. And to be honest, actually, corporate America seems to be far ahead of higher education on this. The sponsor of today's program, KeyBank, for example, has consistently been named a top company for diversity by Diversity Magazine, and I congratulate you for that, Margot. While the University of Cincinnati is a diverse institution with a long history of commitment to diversity, we know that we can do more, and we are going to do more. And it's my role to oversee the university's efforts to identify action to steps to keep that dream moving forward and to reignite our diversity efforts. In a first in our state and possibly for our nation, the University of Cincinnati has partnered with our home county to reach out to foster children. And many of these students are students of color who are left to take care of themselves once they age out of the system. When they turn 18, they are done. And in fact, about 25% of them end up in jail in the first 2 years after they're out of the program. Our higher education mentoring initiative is fortunate to have many mentors who work with these students and made a personal decision to make a difference. They are paired with foster children to help them navigate the college application process and college life. Similarly, our Gen 1 house, a residence for first-generation college students who have the highest potential of dropping out of college, offers extra guidance to those who have no role models when they're thinking about going to college. And the majority of the residents of our Gen 1 house are also people of color. At UC, we have stepped up our efforts to do business with minority-owned enterprises. One of the most significant steps we have taken this year is to award our office supplies contract to Guy Brown Express, an African-American-owned business. Our petroleum products contract is for the first time this year with a minority-owned Hightower Petroleum. In addition, of the 5 promotional product vendors our university uses this fiscal year, 1 is Hispanic and 2 are female-owned. Now, perhaps as Justice Sandra Day O'Connor suggested in the Supreme Court ruling with the University of Michigan Law School cases, we will no longer need this extra attention 25 years from now. And some of you may no doubt question, well, why do we even need it now? We're celebrating 150 years since the beginning of the Civil War. But that's a persistent and puzzling question. Why is it taking so long? Now, one answer to that question can be found in the eye-opening book, Slavery, by Another Name, written by a City Club speaker who you had here last year, Douglas Blackman. And I know that he spoke here and talked about the discoveries in the age of neo-slavery, but I think some of them bear repeating. It was not freedom that took hold in our nation in the decades stretching from the Civil War to World War II. Indeed, actually, we experienced just exactly the opposite. Black men were plucked from their communities, they were charged with crimes, and they were forced to work for American companies in involuntary servitude, a truth not often acknowledged until Blackman exposed it. The author shares a quote from Martin Luther King taken from the notes that Dr. King scribbled in the margins of another publication, quote, "The South deluded itself with the illusion that the Negro was happy in his place. The North deluded itself with the illusion that it freed the Negro. The Emancipation Proclamation freed the slave, a legal entity, but it failed to free the Negro, a person." Blackman continues, "Only by acknowledging the full extent of slavery's grip on U.S. society, its intimate connections to present-day wealth and power, and the depth of its injury to millions of black Americans, and the shocking nearness in time of its true end, can we reconcile the paradoxes of American life." Again, I ask, why is it taking so long? The surest way to speed racial healing in our nation is for each of us, as I suggested before, is to make a personal choice to acknowledge the past, to build bridges between us, and to recognize each other as equals, no matter what our backgrounds or race. As Gandhi has said, we must be the change that we wish to see. In the meantime, in the spirit of Reverend King, we have to keep our eyes focused on the dream. we must come to realize, as he said 48 years ago at the March on Washington, that all of freedom, black and white, is inextricably bound together. We cannot walk alone. As we walk, we must make the pledge, always march ahead and to not turn back. I open my remarks today by telling you that people are sometimes confused about whether I'm white or black. And I am often asked which box on the census I check for my race. Hopefully, someday, to people, it will not matter which box I check. But today, it does matter whether you're black or white. Thank you.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we're listening to a Friday forum featuring Dr. Gregory H. Williams, president of the University of Cincinnati. We will return to our speaker in a minute for our traditional City Club questions. We ask that you formulate your questions now, and please remember to keep them brief. In 2012, the City Club of Cleveland will turn 100 years old. We're planning a number of events, and we will be actively soliciting support through our campaign for a new century. Our celebration will begin on October 10th of this year with a national conference on free speech at the Allen Theater. We encourage you to attend. To learn more about the 100th anniversary events, visit the City Club website, www.cityclub.org/100. We welcome all of you here and those listening to WCPN 90.3 FM, WCLV, WTAM, or one of the many radio stations across the country. Our television broadcast partner is WVIZ PBS IdeaStream. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. We're pleased to welcome guests at tables hosted by Cuyahoga Community College, the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland, Kent State University, Key Bank, and the University of Cincinnati Foundation. Thank you for joining us today. Today's program is also part of the 2011 Key Bank Diversity Thought Leadership Series. At the head table today are Bill Kaler, President of Key Community Bank, and Margot Copeland, Executive Vice President, Director, Corporate Diversity and Philanthropy. Will you please stand and be recognized? We're also pleased to welcome students who are here as part of the City Club Student Program. Participation of these students is made possible by a generous grant from the Jeffrey David Epstein Memorial Student Fund. With us today are students from Success Tech. Will the students please stand and be recognized? Now we'd like to return to our speaker for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphones today are City Club Program Director Carrie Miller and Betsy Wallace, 100th Anniversary Assistant Director. First question, please.
Dr. Williams, first question that I have is, we have a generation of baby boomers, or for a lot of African Americans, that's benefited from affirmative action for us baby boomers. Now we have a second wave of baby boomers that's coming along. As our baby boomer generation is getting older, you have a second generation of baby boomers coming along. My question is this: how can affirmative action programs, how can you apply those programs to a second generation of baby boomers as far as while you're competing in a global society?
Well, I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
Well, I mean, for us preparing a second wave of, you preparing a second wave of baby boomers, like, and using affirmative action as far as retention of students, getting the students into school as then once they graduate from school. Now, how do you prepare them that you're not just competing within the United States, but you're competing within a global society as well?
That's a really good point. Actually, we are competing with a global society, and I think one of the things we really need to do, and a lot of schools are doing this, is to make sure that our students really have international experiences, are able to see the world more broadly. When I was at the City College of New York, for instance, even though more than half the students there were born outside the United States, many of them had no world view. Many of our students at universities these days really have no worldview, and so I think it's incumbent upon universities to make sure that students have exposure and experiences with folks from around the world, so that when you graduate, that this is not something new, that you understand what other cultures are like, at least have some experience, so when you go out you will not be handicapped in the job world as you might be if you have not have a broader focus.
Dr. Williams, you didn't talk about your grandmother's, your father's father and his relationship to your grandmother. What do you know about that?
My father's father, actually that's work that I'm doing on a second book. He didn't really have much contact, as I talked about in my first book, actually, that my father's father, was a white man, but he was never together with my grandmother. And so there's really not much, but I'm trying to find out what I can about that. You know, it's really interesting tracing this family tree back, and I did trace it back a little bit and found out, as for instance, how did we get the name Williams? Because my grandmother's name was Higginbottom in Kentucky. And so I traced it back, and internets are great things, and I traced it back that there was checking in city registers. The Higginbottoms had 8 girls in the family. Right next door were the Williamses with 5 boys. So that's how we got the name Williams. My grandmother married one of the Williams boys, actually, who lived in Garfield Heights for about 40 years. And I used to come and visit him a lot here in Garfield Heights. Yeah, so.
Dr. Williams, over here.
Yeah, okay.
What do you attribute your academic success in a grade school and high school that allowed you to go on to receive, obviously, a fine education?
Well, that's a great question, and I guess what I attribute it to is persistence and not being frustrated. Actually, when I was in the 6th grade in elementary school, my teacher told me that I was going to receive the award for the most outstanding student in the 6th grade, and we went to the rummage sale and got a suit for me, and I was all dressed up in my new rummage sale suit there, and then I arrived, but I found out I didn't get the award. It was a whites-only award. And I found out when I was in high school, actually, even though I was in the top 10% of my high school class, I was not admitted to any of the honors classes. Out of 660 students, my final class ranking was 62nd. But I was not admitted to any of the honors classes. So I guess it was persistence and dealing with frustration and not letting it hold me back. Now, my dad was very interested in education. He spent a year at Howard University. And to show his commitment to education, actually, he and a buddy by the name of Arnold Robbins, they had, actually, when they were in high school in my hometown in the 1930s, all blacks were diverted to either industrial arts, if you were boys, or home economics, if you were girls. So for him to go to Howard University, he had to go back to school for a year, take postgraduate courses, postgraduate high school courses to qualify for Howard University. When he was admitted to Howard University, he had absolutely no money to go to Howard University, and so he and his buddy, Arnold, were going to hitchhike from Muncie, Indiana to Washington, D.C. And in fact, they did. They started on US 40, and the uncle that I was telling you about here told me that story. My dad was, of course, light-skinned. His buddy was very dark-skinned, and there was no way that 2 guys in 1936, 2 black guys, when we picked up to hitchhike across the country. And so what they did, Dad would wait until Arnold got a ride, then he would get a ride, and then they would go along till he saw Arnold standing by the side of the road having been dropped off. And so that way, they hopscotched 650 miles from Muncie, Indiana to Washington, D.C. to go to college. That's persistence, and that's what I learned, and that's what has helped me pursue my education.
Dr. Williams, you have the incredibly unique opportunity to see America in black and white. And yes, we have fallen far short of the dream. What is your assessment of race relations in America for the last 10 years? Are we still moving toward Dr. King's dream, or is America becoming more racially and ethnically polarized?
I think we're moving forward. I continue to be optimistic. My dad was always optimistic, but I think it's in fits and starts. Sometimes it looks like we're going forward, and then something just jumps up and just, smacks you upside the head. That really just surprises you. And I certainly have had those kind of experiences where, I think I mentioned yesterday the folks at Key Bank. Just yesterday, I received an email from one of my high school students. Who was high school. He was not a friend. He's a white guy who really sent me this really racist email. I'm thinking, what? What is this all about? And that kind of surprised me in a very significant way, because I thought this guy had made some strides in his personal understanding. So I said, yes, we have moved forward, but there's a lot of fits and starts, and we have to make sure that we're not diverted, and that it stays on the front burner in terms of our focus. That this is something we really need to work on. It's not going to happen unless we do something about it and recognize it. There's a lot of other things on our burners these days, but this is very important if the society really is ever going to come together and bridge the races in the way I think we want to.
Sir, when you were about 18 or 19, around that age, you were white enough to leave anything black behind you and go into a white society without having been detected. Why didn't you do that?
Well, I'm a person that learns from history, and actually the history of my father. That's the one thing that destroyed him, because when we lived in Virginia, he was trying to pass for white, and he could not be the person that he really wanted to be. He could not recognize my grandmother, his mother, in the way that he really wanted to, and so that was the inner turmoil. When we arrived in Indiana, like I said earlier, we were not welcomed into the white community. In fact, we were ostracized from the white community. There was only a few people that was willing to stand up with us, people like Dora Terry Weekly. And so my feeling is that if I abandoned them when they were with me in a time in which there was a price to pay for being a friend of Greg Williams, then I have no principles whatsoever.
Dr. Williams, I recently read a book in undergrad that stated that the problem with diversity these days with corporations and in higher education is not that diversity is one of their strong points, but that it's their disacknowledgement of economic class as being the real problem and not the problem between white and black. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that issue.
Well, I think it's both. I think there clearly is issues of economic class, and a lot of students have some very significant economic hurdles that they face. That's one of the reasons why we and all the college presidents that I know try to keep tuition as low as we can, understanding that this is a real challenge for students in this day and age, because we want to continue to be accessible and make sure that opportunities exist for students of limited resources. That's one of the reasons why I'm sure any campaign that a university is being engaged in, the number one thing they're looking for in that campaign are scholarship dollars. How can we continue to help the students who need help? And, of course, that is proportionally larger among communities of color, to be quite frank, than it is among white communities, although there's certainly poverty across the board and challenges across the board. But it's certainly a focus of higher education and something we hold near and dear to us.
Dr. Williams?
Yes, sir.
Hi. You spoke about the need for each of us to be the change individually. What things do you see that we can do as individuals that we could do better? What changes could we make within ourselves?
Well, that's kind of an individual decision that you have to make yourself, because you know your talents, you know your skills, you know what you bring to the table, and how can you do what you do and be more inclusive in that. For instance, I have a friend that I talked about yesterday who's in commercial real estate development. And so one of the things she was trying to do was to address that issue I talk about, the wealth gap, the 20-to-1 wealth gap of blacks versus whites. And so she has worked in a situation bringing her own particular skills, talents, and abilities to that case to help put together blacks to buy an apartment building, actually, to really kind of help them to think about ways in which we can erase that wealth gap. Each person has their own skills and abilities that they bring to the table. You know that better than I do. But what I would say is think about that skill you have or the ability you have or the background or training you have, and how can you be more inclusive in what you do. And I think that's an individual decision that each of us made. In Miss Dora's case, she had a home, and she could provide a home for us. And that's what she was willing to do. She didn't have much else. But that was shelter for us, and that made a difference. It saved my life.
Dr. Williams, first of all, thank you for sharing your journey with us. I think you certainly have made some significant contributions, and we're just very proud to have you with us.
Thank you.
Secondly, in your opening commentary, you shared some data and shared just a little bit about where African American males are in terms of education. As a college administrator, you certainly are aware of the significant differences in gender as well as in race that we are facing in higher education. Any comments on what we are seeing? In Cleveland at Cuyahoga Community College, we're currently at about 67% female population, and we of course see a significant decline in the number of percentage of African American males. Any comments on that as part of your story?
Well, that is a very serious issue that you're addressing. There's no question about that, males, we're continuing to lose African American males. When I was president of the City College of New York, we had what we called in the City University of New York system a Black Male Initiative, where we really were trying to focus on that and to do a number of things. Of course, reaching out, going to where the folks were, trying to find out, well, maybe they were in school, why they drop out of school, what are ways we can bring them back, can we put together mentor groups that sit down and work with the students. There's, it's not rocket science, but it does require some attention to individuals and finding out what's going on, because then that way we can tailor and shape programs. But it is something that requires a lot of attention. We're very concerned about that. I know at the university level, I know my colleagues here are concerned about it as well. One of the things that we were concerned about at the university was our retention rate. And we didn't want a retention rate that was substantially different for whites than it was for blacks, because then we're not doing our job. And actually our retention rate, after focusing on it over the last, say, 8 or 9 years, has gone from something like 71% to 87% for this class that's coming back this fall. And what's more interesting to me than that rate, and I'm very pleased with that rate, is that the African American rate is almost at the same place in terms of retention. But again, it requires focus, it requires individual commitment. That's why I talk about our Gen 1 house at the very beginning, getting students thinking about what do you have to do to succeed. To give you some idea, folks oftentimes don't know what to do. Now, when I was a freshman student in college, I thought I was going to play football and basketball, but I didn't get a scholarship, so I had to get a job. And I was washing dishes at the hospital and doing some other things. And I went into the financial aid office, and I filled out the application. And they said, well, what's your father's income? And my dad, of course, was an alcoholic, was not working, so that was zero. What's your mother's income? And I hadn't seen my mother for 10 years, and so that was a zero. What's your income? And I'm making 75 cents an hour washing dishes, so that's definitely a zero. So I said, no one is going to believe that I am this poor. And so what I did is I tore that financial aid application up, and this breaks financial aid officers' hearts when they hear me tell the story. I tore that financial aid application up, and I walked out. I threw it in the trash and walked out of there. Can you imagine? Future president of the University of Cincinnati was not smart enough to know you should be applying for financial aid. And I probably could have gotten a scholarship. I had about a 3.5 grade point average, an undergraduate, something like that. But again, it was not knowing the process, not knowing how things worked, not having someone who was saying, Greg, Jesus, why don't you apply for a scholarship? And yeah, you're poor. Hell, you're probably going to get some money. But it's, again, that type of thing. And so it's often, what I often say, and I think my college presidents will testify the same thing, it can be one thing that makes a difference between success and failure of a student. And what we have to do is we have to find out what that's going to be. And it's going to be different for each student. And that's why we have to be really connected, because we don't know what that one thing is. And that's why the programs I'm talking about are so important, because there is so much at stake. We're talking about the difference between a person just walking out and never coming back to school. And actually, when I... Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we've been listening to Dr. Gregory H. Williams, President of the University of Cincinnati. Thank you, Dr. Williams. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.